Vivid verses.
I moved to Crestfield in early spring, when the maples along Thornberry Avenue were still bare and the air had that particular bite that makes you feel like the year is holding its breath. I had taken a position as a senior analyst at Vantera Consulting, a mid-sized firm that handled operational restructuring for companies too proud to admit they were falling apart. The work suited me. I was good at seeing what other people prefer not to see. My apartment was on the fourth floor of a converted warehouse on Pelham Street. Exposed brick, tall windows, the kind of place that looks intentional but is actually just old. I had chosen it because the lease terms were clean and the landlord communicated exclusively by email, which told me he was organized, or at least that he valued his own time enough to protect it. I settled into Crestfield the way I settle into most things, methodically and without much fanfare. I found a gym called Iron Quarter 3 blocks away and was there every morning at 6. I found a coffee shop called the Copper Press on the corner of Ashwell and 2nd, where the espresso was consistent and the staff left you alone if your laptop was open. I found a dry cleaner, a grocery store with reliable produce, and a barber named Pete who didn't talk unless he started it. Within 6 weeks, I had a functional life. The social layer came more slowly, as it always does when you're an adult transplant in a city that already has its circles drawn. My colleague at Vantera, a project manager named Owen Hartley, was the one who bridged that gap. Owen was the kind of person who genuinely liked people, not in a naive way, but in the way of someone who had thought about it and arrived at warmth as a considered position. He introduced me to his loose circle of friends over a dinner at his place on a Tuesday night in April. A landscape architect named Sam, a woman who taught secondary school English named Priya, a software developer named Tom, and a woman named Claire. Claire Voss. She arrived 20 minutes after everyone else, which I registered without judgment. She had dark hair cut short, wore a burgundy jacket over a plain white shirt, and had the particular quality of filling a room without seeming to try. She sat across from me at Owen's table and, within 10 minutes, had correctly identified that I was new to Crestfield, that I worked in consulting, and that I was trying to figure out whether I liked the city yet. "You haven't decided," she said. It wasn't a question. "No," I said. "That's the right answer. Anyone who decides immediately is either lying or not paying attention." I thought that was a good observation. I filed it. We talked for most of the dinner. She was a freelance brand strategist. She worked for herself, took clients she chose, and had strong opinions about which industries she wouldn't touch. She had grown up in Crestfield, left for 8 years, come back 2 years ago. She knew the city the way you only know a place you've been angry at and then forgiven. Over the following weeks, she became part of my life in the measured, deliberate way I approach most things. We had coffee, then dinner, then more dinners. She met me at a gallery opening that Priya had invited us both to, and we walked back through the Thornberry district afterward and talked for 2 hours in the kind of conversation where you lose track of the time, not because you're enchanted, but because the ideas keep connecting. I respected that. I respected her. By June, we were, without having formally declared it, together. She kept a few things in my apartment. I had a standing key to hers. We fell into patterns. Saturday mornings at the Harrow Market, Sunday evenings cooking at mine, Friday nights that might be dinner out or might be a quiet evening, and depending on the week. She was smart, and she was capable, and she was interesting to talk to. She also had a quality I noticed early and cataloged without alarm. She remembered things with tremendous precision when those things concerned her. When it came to things she had said or agreed to, her memory was considerably less reliable. The first time it surfaced, I let it pass. She had suggested we go to a recital that her former client was performing in, a cellist named Adira, who Claire had done branding work for. "We'll go on the 12th, she said, on a Thursday evening in May. It's at the Linden Arts Center. On the evening of the 12th, She texted to say she was exhausted and asked if we could skip it. I had already gotten dressed. I went alone, sent Adira a message that Claire was unwell, and said nothing more about it when I got home. The second time, it was a dinner she had agreed to host for Owen's birthday, a small gathering at her place, her idea entirely, raised on a Sunday morning while we were at the Harrow Market. She had been enthusiastic about it. She had even said she wanted to make her lamb dish, the one she'd learned from her grandmother. 10 days later, when I asked about logistics, she looked at me with a mild frown and said she didn't remember agreeing to host. I suggested we go out instead, she said. I replayed the conversation in my mind. I was confident in what I had heard. You mentioned the lamb dish specifically, I said. She shook her head, not unkindly. I might have mentioned the dish in passing. I don't think I said I'd host. I dropped it. Owen's birthday became a dinner at the Hartwell Grill, which was fine. I took note. The third time was in July, and it was sharper. She had told me, clearly, over dinner at my place on a Wednesday night, that she thought we should meet each other's families before summer ended. She said it while we were washing up, while I was drying a glass, and she said it with the particular directness she had when she meant something. I want that to be real, she said, not theoretical. I agreed. I called my brother in Portswick and arranged a weekend visit for late August. When I told her I had made the arrangements, she looked at me with an expression that was almost puzzled. I don't know if I'm ready for that, she said. It's a big step. You suggested it, I said. I might have mentioned it as a thought, not as a plan. I studied her face for a moment. There was no guilt there. That was the part worth noting, not the contradiction, but the absence of discomfort at the contradiction. She didn't look like someone who had misspoken and was now backtracking. She looked like someone who genuinely believed her version. I canceled the Portswick arrangements, told my brother something had come up, and said nothing to Claire about the inconvenience. I did, however, start keeping records. I want to be precise about what I mean by records. I am not, by nature, a suspicious person. I am an analytical one, which is different. I don't move through the world looking for problems. But I have spent enough of my professional life identifying structural failures in organizations to recognize when something that presents as an anomaly is actually a pattern. The note-taking was not a conspiracy. It was a document. I kept a folder on my laptop called Simply Log, the same place I keep notes on anything I want to remember accurately. I logged the date, what had been said, and what was later claimed. I did this without anger and without a predetermined conclusion. I was gathering data. By August, the log had 7 entries. They followed a structure I came to recognize. Claire would make a suggestion, an offer, or a commitment, usually unprompted, usually with warmth and apparent sincerity. Some time would pass. When the commitment came due, she would either not remember making it, remember it differently in a way that reduced her obligation, or introduce a retroactive caveat that changed its meaning. If I noted the discrepancy, she didn't argue loudly. She would hold her position quietly, with the particular confidence of someone who has decided their memory is the authoritative record. What struck me most was the asymmetry. She remembered, with perfect clarity, a time in June when I had been 20 minutes late to meet her at the Ashwell Farmers Fair. She referenced it 3 weeks later in a different conversation as evidence that I was sometimes careless with time. She remembered that I had ordered the wrong wine at Priya's dinner, a Calvetto Rosso when she had wanted white, and mentioned it lightly but unmistakably when we next discussed restaurants. She remembered a comment I had made in passing about her client work, something I had said without weight, and brought it back 2 months later as something that had bothered her. Her memory, when it served her, was a steel trap. When it didn't serve her, it was gauze. I did not bring this observation to her directly. Not yet. What I had was a pattern, not a proof, and I had learned, professionally and personally, that premature conclusions are their own kind of mistake. You don't walk into a boardroom with a hypothesis. You walk in with documentation. So I waited. In the meantime, I continued to be what I was. I showed up on time. I followed through on things I said I would do. I kept the friendship with Owen and Sam and the others because I valued it independently of Claire, and I had been careful from the start to maintain that independence. A person who builds a social life entirely through a partner is a person who has quietly signed over leverage they didn't know they had. The dinner in September was the moment things clarified. It was at Tom's apartment, a house party of sorts, though intimate by most definitions. 8 people, good wine from a shop called Vaulted on the other side of the city, food laid out on Tom's long kitchen table. Owen was there, and Priya, and a few people I was still learning, a couple named Run and Bianca, and a woman named Harper who had known Claire since childhood. I had met Harper twice before. She was bright and easy to talk to and had the quality, common among people who grew up together, of speaking about Claire with a particular kind of shorthand, references I wasn't always in on, shared history I glimpsed rather than knew. I didn't mind that. Everyone has a history. What I noticed that evening was something smaller than a confrontation and larger than a gesture. We were standing near Tom's kitchen window, a group of 5, me, Claire, Harper, Rin, and Priya, talking about nothing in particular, a new restaurant that had opened near the Thornbury district, whether it was worth the wait. Claire was talking, and as she talked, she reached out and touched Harper's arm with the ease of old friendship, and Harper looked at her with a smile that was warm but also, I thought, careful. That carefulness caught my attention. Later in the evening, while Claire was talking to Bianca across the room, I found myself near the drinks table with Harper. "You've known Claire a long time," I said. "Since we were 14, she said, "at Salloway Secondary. We were inseparable for years." "Were," I said. "Not a challenge, just an observation." Harper looked at me with a slight adjustment behind her eyes. "She's not easy to stay close to," she said, and then seemed to recalibrate, the way people do when they realize they've said more than they intended. "I mean, she's wonderful, but she has her ways." "Everyone does," I said. Harper nodded, and I moved the conversation elsewhere, and she seemed relieved that I had. But I held that phrase. She has her ways. It was the language of someone who had reached an accommodation with something they had stopped expecting to change. I drove home alone that night. Claire stayed at Harper's, and I sat for a while on my kitchen table with a glass of water and the particular quiet of a late evening and thought about the shape of what I was in. I concluded, in something that looked like a relationship, but functioned like an arrangement in which one person kept score and the other person controlled the scorecard. It was not dramatic. It was not cruel in any theatrical sense. It was simply a long sequence of small deletions and insertions, each one deniable on its own, systematic in aggregate. I opened my laptop and looked at the log. 11 entries now. October came with a particular test. The context: Owen's firm had an event, a mid-year client dinner at the Eastfield Supper Club, a long-running institution on Carver Lane that I had never been to but had heard about. Owen had invited both Claire and me months earlier, and Claire had, explicitly, said she would arrange the reservation for our table of 4. Her, me, Owen, and his girlfriend Margot, who was visiting from out of town. This was in August. She had said at my kitchen table, after Owen had sent the message about it. "I'll take care of the reservation," she said. "I know the manager there. Used to do some work for them." I said good. I sent Owen a message saying Claire was handling it. Owen thanked me. 6 weeks later, 2 weeks before the dinner, I asked Claire where we were with the booking. She looked at me, fork paused halfway to her mouth, and said, "What booking?" "The Eastfield Supper Club. Owen's client dinner." A small frown. "I thought you were handling that." I felt nothing outwardly, which is to say I felt quite a lot inwardly, all of it controlled. "You told me you'd take care of it." You said you knew the manager. I might have mentioned that I know the manager, she said. I don't think I said I'd make the reservation. There it was. The architecture, clean as ever. She had taken a commitment and retrospectively hollowed it out, leaving only the peripheral detail, the connection to the manager, and discarded the operative part. I didn't argue. I said, all right, I'll sort it. I called Eastfield Supper Club the next morning, fully booked for the relevant date. I called Owen and explained, honestly, that the reservation had not been made, without specifying why, and Owen, being Owen, said not to worry. He'd find somewhere else, and he did. A smaller place called the Pelham Table, which turned out to be better anyway. But that evening, after we had both settled in at mine, and Claire was reading on the sofa, I spoke. I want to say something, I said, and I'd like you to hear it before you respond. She looked up from her book. I sat down across from her. Not beside her, across from her, which was a deliberate choice, and I said, without warmth or coldness in the tone I use when I am presenting findings, I've noticed a pattern over the past several months. You make commitments, and then, when they come due, you don't remember making them, or you remember them differently in a way that removes your obligation. This has happened enough times that I don't think it's forgetfulness. She held my gaze. What are you saying? I'm saying that you remember what serves you and forget what doesn't. That's not poor memory, Claire. That's a form of dishonesty. The word landed. I watched it. That's a serious accusation, she said. Her voice was measured, but something behind it had tightened. I'm not accusing you of lying in the way most people mean it. I'm describing something more structural. You've never told me a lie you knew was a lie, as far as I know. But you have consistently revised history in your favor, and I have consistently absorbed the cost. That's the pattern. You're describing your interpretation, she said. I'm describing documented instances, I said. Documented? Yes. A pause. Something moved across her expression. Not quite surprise, not quite guilt. Something more like recalculation. You've been keeping notes, she said. I've been keeping records, I said, the way I do with anything I want to be accurate about. She was quiet for a moment. Then, that feels like surveillance. I understand why it might feel that way, I said. But I kept records because your account of events has not aligned with mine repeatedly, and I wanted to be sure I wasn't wrong. I wanted to bring accuracy to the conversation, not grievance. She put the book down. She was thinking. I could see it. She was not the kind of person who responded carelessly when she felt cornered. That much I had always known. And for a moment, I thought she might meet the truth honestly. Instead, she said, I think you're being paranoid. I think you've been building a case because you want one, and now everything looks like evidence. That's possible, I said. That's why I have the records. Would you like to go through them? No, she said. I don't want to sit here while you audit our relationship. Then we're at an impasse, I said. She left that evening. Not dramatically. She gathered her things without a scene, said she needed space to think, and went. I made no gesture to stop her, made no speech, and did not, at any point, raise my voice. I sat at the kitchen table afterward and drank a glass of water and thought about what had just happened. What had just happened was, I had said a true thing, and she had declined to engage with it. That was information. That was, in some ways, the clearest information the whole situation had produced. She came back 4 days later. This is worth noting. I did not pursue her during those 4 days. I did not send the explanatory message, the gentle checking in, the softening overture that the situation seemed to call for according to a certain emotional script I recognized, but did not follow. I went to Iron Quarter each morning. I worked. I had dinner with Owen and Margot one evening, which had been planned before all of this, and I enjoyed the company and said nothing about what was happening with Claire because it wasn't relevant to the evening. When she came back, She came with the particular posture of someone who has been thinking hard and arrived at a position they have decided is reasonable. She sat at my kitchen table and she said, "I think we need to talk properly." I made coffee and sat down. "I've been thinking about what you said," she began, "and I think you have a distorted perception of our relationship. I think you've been cataloging grievances instead of communicating them, and that's not healthy." I noted, without commenting on it, that she had shifted the conversation from the accuracy of my observations to the manner in which I had processed them. It was a competent move. It meant she no longer had to address whether the pattern was real. She could instead address whether I had handled it correctly. "My communication with you has been direct and consistent," I said. "Each time a specific commitment was revised, I raised it with you at the time. You can see that in the records too, if you'd like to." She paused. "This is what I mean. You're approaching this like a case file. I'm approaching it like a man who wants to be accurate," I said. "I don't have the option of relying on a shared account because our accounts don't match. So I rely on documentation." She was quiet for a moment. Then, carefully, "Where do you think this leaves us?" "That depends on what you're prepared to acknowledge. I'm not going to sit here and confess to things I don't believe I did." "I'm not asking for a confession," I said. "I'm asking you to consider the possibility that the pattern I've described is real. Not malicious, necessarily. Not calculated, but real." It was a longer quiet. I drank my coffee. Outside, Pelham Street was doing its usual Saturday afternoon business. The produce stall on the corner, a couple of cyclists, the particular light that Crestfield gets in October, amber and clear. Then she said something unexpected. "Harper talked to me." I waited. "She said she'd spoken to you at Tom's party. She said you were observant." A small pause. "She told me she'd seen this before. With me." I didn't say anything. "She said I do this. That I've done it with her, with other people." Claire's voice was still controlled, but something under it had shifted, a small seismic thing, barely detectable. "She said I have a habit of rewriting things in my favor and not realizing I'm doing it." "What do you think of what she said?" I asked. "I think she's been waiting a long time to say it," Claire said, and there was a defensiveness there. But underneath the defensiveness, if you listen carefully, was the thin, clear note of someone who had been told something true and could not quite dismiss it. "That may be," I said. "The question is whether she's right." She didn't answer. "I don't need you to resolve this today," I said. "But I need you to understand that I can't continue to absorb the cost of a pattern you won't acknowledge. Not because I'm angry, but because doing so would be a form of dishonesty I'm not willing to participate in." She looked at me for a long time. "You're very calm about all this," she said. There was something in her voice, not quite accusation, not quite admiration. "Getting angry would make it about my feelings," I said. "This is about whether we can be honest with each other. Those are different things." She left again, not storming out, just, "I need more time." Fine. I had more than enough to occupy mine. There's a version of this story in which I used what I had found to humiliate her. The dinner party at Priya's, 2 weeks later, would have been the obvious stage for it. A gathering of 7, the inner circle of that Crestfield social world I had joined carefully and maintained well. Claire was there, and Owen, and Harper, and Tom, and Priya herself. The conversation over Priya's spiced lamb and roasted vegetable spread moved through the usual evening terrain. A ridiculous planning dispute in the Thornbury district, a documentary that everyone seemed to have opinions about, the question of whether Crestfield's art scene was growing or just getting louder. And then the topic that seemed harmless from the outside, reliability. Tom was telling a story about a contractor who had left a job half done and disappeared. It led, naturally, to the general question of what you do when someone consistently lets you down. I am aware of how easy it would have been, in that moment, to tilt the conversation. A comment precisely placed. The kind of thing that sounds like general observation but lands like a blade. I have the instinct for it. I know how to use words efficiently and with effect. I knew the room well enough to know exactly how it would land and where. I didn't do it, not because I lacked the nerve and not because I had forgiven her. I didn't do it because it would have been a performance, and I have no interest in performing. The truth was already in the room, had been in the room since Harper's quiet conversation with Claire. What I would have been doing was decorating it with spectacle for the satisfaction of watching her uncomfortable. That's not what I'm for. I made a general observation about documentation being underrated in professional relationships, which got a laugh, and the conversation moved on, and Claire across the table held my gaze for a moment with an expression I couldn't fully classify, and then looked at her wine. After dinner, while Tom was making coffee in the kitchen, Harper found me near the bookshelf in Priya's living room. She had this slightly deliberate quality of someone who had positioned themselves next to you on purpose. "She told me you two talked," Harper said. "We did," I said. "She's been thinking about it." Harper paused. "I want you to know I wasn't trying to involve myself." "You told her the truth," I said. "That's involvement I have no objection to." She gave a small nod. "She doesn't always know when she's doing it. I think that's real. I've watched her do it for years, and I'm still not certain how much of it is conscious." She paused again. "That might not make it easier." "It makes it accurate," I said. "That's enough." She looked at me with a steadiness that I appreciated. "What are you going to do?" "Nothing dramatic," I said. "The truth has already done what it needed to do. I'm just deciding how I want to live." She seemed to understand that. She moved away. Tom appeared with coffee. The evening ended the way good evenings do. Gradually, warmly, with coats retrieved and thanks offered in the Crestfield autumn cold waiting outside. Claire and I walked to our separate cars. We stood on the pavement for a moment under the particular orange of the streetlight on Priya's block. "I've been thinking," she said. "I know," I said. "I don't know how to be sure whether I'm doing what you described." A pause. "That's an uncomfortable thing to not know about yourself." "Yes," I said. "Harper said she brought it up with me once, years ago, and I told her she was wrong. I dismissed it completely." She looked at the pavement briefly, then back at me. I remember that conversation differently than she does, which I suppose is the point. I'll let that sit between us for a moment. "What I can tell you," I said, "is that what I've observed has been real. And that continuing in the same way isn't something I'm willing to do. Not because of anger, because the math doesn't work." She absorbed that. "What does that mean for us?" "It means I need to decide what I can invest in and what I can't. And I need some time to do that." She nodded. She looked for a moment genuinely uncertain. Not the performed uncertainty of someone managing a conversation, but the real kind. The kind that comes when you have caught a glimpse of yourself from outside and the image doesn't match the one you've been carrying. She got her car. I watched it go. There is, I've learned, a kind of indication that has no taste. You can be right about something and feel no particular pleasure in it. You can watch a pattern confirm itself exactly as predicted and find that the confirmation changes nothing essential. The loss is still a loss. The time spent is still spent, and the correctness of your analysis doesn't restore anything that was given away before the analysis was complete. I spent the following week in the ordinary rhythm of my life. Iron quarter at 6. Vantera, where I was in the middle of a restructuring project for a logistics firm called Cavender Group. Complex, interesting work that I was genuinely absorbed by. Copper press in the afternoons when the thinking required a change of surface. Saturday at the Harrow Market, where I had by now developed the small, real familiarity of regulars. The woman who sold the cheese and always gave me a sample of whatever was new. The man at the bread stall who knew I wanted the sourdough unsliced. A functional life, well maintained. Owen came by on Thursday evening with takeaway from a Vantera place on Ashfield Road called Hatch and Rye, and we ate at my kitchen table and talked about the Cavender project and about Margot, who was moving to Crestfield in December and about whether the new bar near the Pelham Inn was actually as good as everyone was saying. It was the kind of evening I had worked to build in the months since moving here. Easy, low pressure, real. At some point, Owen said, without preamble, "Things seem steady with you." "They are," I said. He let that be enough, which is one of the things I like about Owen. On Saturday afternoon, I met Claire at the Copper Press. She had asked for the meeting, and I had said yes because I was curious to hear what she had arrived at, and because I had made my own decision and wanted to deliver it plainly rather than by silence or slow withdrawal, which are cowards' options. She was there when I arrived, which I noted. She had ordered, which I noted. Both small departures from the usual pattern. I sat down and accepted the coffee the barista brought over. "I've been doing something," she said, "since our last conversation." A pause. "I've been keeping a log of my own, of commitments I make to other people, to see whether I follow through." I looked at her steadily. "And it's clarifying," she said. "It's unpleasant, and it's clarifying." She wrapped her hands around her cup. "I'm not going to tell you I've resolved anything. I'm not wired for quick resolutions. But I can tell you that I heard what you said and Harper's version, and I'm not dismissing it." "I appreciate that," I said. "Is it enough?" she asked. Plainly, without drama. I thought about the question carefully, the way it deserved. "Not for what we were," I said. "But that's not a punishment. It's an honest assessment. What we had was built on a version of you that wasn't complete, and a version of me that was absorbing more than was sustainable. That architecture doesn't hold. We can't pretend it does." She was quiet. "What I can tell you," I continued, "is that this isn't about blame. You're not a villain, and I'm not a victim. We were two people with incompatible operating systems, and I stayed in it longer than I should have because I didn't want to mistake a pattern for a verdict." "Did you?" she asked. "Mistake it?" "No," I said. She nodded. A small, clean acknowledgement. Not resignation. Something more deliberate than that. Something that might, given enough time, grow into the kind of understanding people arrive at when they've been honest with each other, even when it was hard. "What happens now?" she said. "I don't know in full, but I think we can both stay in the life we've built here, the circle with Owen and Priya and the others, without pretending or avoiding. I'm not interested in making things difficult." "You wouldn't," she said. And then, quietly, almost to herself, "I don't think I fully understood what it meant that you never got angry." "It meant I was paying attention," I said. We finished our coffee. We left the Copper Press together and walked for a minute in the same direction before the route split. Her toward Ashwell, me toward Pelham. And we said a clean goodbye, the kind that ends something without ceremony, without flourish, with a kind of civil acknowledgement that something real had happened and had been treated with the seriousness it deserved. I walked back to my apartment. The Crestfield afternoon was doing what it does in late October. Light going amber at 3 o'clock. The maples on Thornbury finally finished with their leaves. The air with that particular clarity that comes before the cold settles in for good. I passed the dry cleaner and the barber and the corner where the produce stall operates on weekends. I passed the man with the retriever who I saw most afternoons and had never spoken to but always nodded at. He nodded. I nodded back. In my apartment, I opened my laptop and navigated to the folder called Log. I didn't delete it. Deletion felt like a different kind of dishonesty, an erasure of something real. But I created a new document beside it and wrote a single line. Pattern confirmed. Ledger closed. Then I made tea, stood at my tall window, and watched Pelham Street for a while, the ordinary, functional, well-considered life of it, and felt something that wasn't triumph and wasn't grief. It was closer to equilibrium, which, when I thought about it, was exactly what I had come to Crestfield looking for, without knowing I was looking for it. The maples would come back in spring. The Harrow Market would run every Saturday regardless. Iron Quarter opened at 5:30, and the Copper Press opened at 7, and Pete the Barber would be at his station on Tuesday afternoons, and Owen would text about takeaway when the mood struck him. The Cavanagh Group restructuring had 3 months left and was genuinely interesting work. And somewhere in the city, Claire Voss was keeping a log of her own commitments, learning the hard and necessary discipline of watching herself accurately. That was not nothing. That was, in fact, more than I had expected. I drank my tea and turned away from the window, and the apartment was quiet, and the evening was beginning, and the day had been what it was, and that was enough.
Thanks for listening.